I want to introduce our next speaker. This is Rachel, Rachel Myers. Rachel is a full-stack engineer running her own business to help teams ship safely and quickly. And most recently, she founded Absolutely. Is that how it's pronounced? Yeah, awesomeness. Y Combinator company to ease the pain of deployments. And before that, she was an engineer at GitHub and MagmaLabs. Her mischievous cat functions as a chaos monkey for her home. And in her free time, Rachel is learning Illustrator to better design products for her Etsy store. So say hi and snag a sticker. And it would be awesome if you give us your Etsy username as well to check out what you're doing.
Testing? Oh, yeah. I think it's going to fall off. Oh, cool. Okay. Hola? Yeah, okay. Hola. I'm Rachel. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm going to give another slightly longer introduction. Yesterday, I got this cool hat. I also got married. So Mexico has been great so far. We'll see what happens. There we go. And in the last year, I've done some other crazy things. Starting with, I left my job that had good health care. And I started a company, and I named it after a pun that no one could say. That was a cool idea. It's ops and absolutely, and it's absolutely, and no one knows what it means. And then absolutely got into a startup accelerator, so we did that, and that was fun. It was like talking to customers and building things and talking to customers and building things, so we did that. But as this story goes, there was founder conflict. So in December, I left Absolutely. It didn't mean that I had to stop saying the word. I still have to keep saying the word. And I started contracting, which has been marvelous. Because as a contractor, when you show up and you say, this is the plan, they say, great, that's what we pay you for. Why didn't you say that when I worked for you? Doesn't make sense. And then I also started an Etsy store, which is hilarious because I'm a terrible designer and I've never designed anything. But now I make feminist stickers. Because who doesn't need feminist stickers? All of you need feminist stickers. I brought a bag of them to give away, so I would yes. Feminist stickers for all. And I would also like to shout out to the people who created my avatar. I love my luchadora. I think of La Maravilla Explosiva as like my secret alter ego. Because I am a very dutiful, go to work, do my job kind of person. I am very reliable and conscientious. But La Maravilla Explosiva, you don't mess with her. She will explode at you. That's what it is. It's great. So I'm very excited about it. Thank you. Okay, on to deploys. I'm a software engineer. I'm not an operations engineer, and I'm not a DevOps engineer. And so it's kind I'm the person with all these questions and opinions about how deploys could work better. And to be honest, I started down this road of caring so much about deploys because I really loved almost all of my job, not quite all of my job. So just to bring this point home, I love breaking down projects. I love sketching out what the outline of the implementation would be. And then, you know when you like have an implementation but you need to get it to work, so you're like so you try something and then you run into a problem, so you fix that problem, and you run into the next problem, so you fix that problem. I always think of this as like, okay, I'm gonna demonstrate. Okay, like when a ballerina is up on her toes, and then she takes tiny itty little steps, like, but she goes really fast and she goes across the stage, which I will not do because that would be embarrassing. That implementation ballet dance of like, to like succeeding. So I love that. That's so much fun. You're going so fast and you feel like you're just making lots of progress. Love doing that. And I might be the only person in this room, like people tell me that they hate this part, but I really love it. Writing the pull request with paragraphs of explanation about, like for the code reviewers, later on for myself, when I'm trying to figure out what I was trying to do. Where I explain what the point of this was, what my concerns were, all these things. I love writing pull requests. So I love almost everything about my job. And then there's this one thing that I cannot stand. This last step that I should love when I ship my feature to all the users. This is the time when everything freezes up, when other people become afraid, when I become afraid, when it seems like things are going to go wrong. So I just really hated deploys. And if you do not hate deploys, let me motivate this and convince you that deploys are terrible. You probably don't need to be convinced, but I will just outline why they're terrible. The first one is that when you're deploying your code, you're putting it in the production environment, which is usually a little bit different in subtle ways than all the places you put your code up to this point. So those differences mean that I could do my very best to cover all my bases and think of everything. And when I deploy, I will probably still find something that I did not catch up to this point. Secondly, as a community, there are so many tools and processes that you can use to deploy that it doesn't feel like a standard, well-oiled machine yet. I worked at a company where we had a handful of applications. And there was this one time when I needed to make 3 changes. I needed to make changes in 3 different apps. So to do that, I had to figure out 3 different ways to deploy, one for each one. We had one that was the main app, and it had really nice tooling. That was great. I knew how to deploy that one. There was another one that wasn't used very often. It still had a Capistrano script. That was fine. And there was another one that started off as a prototype, and we just kept it running. So that was still running in Heroku. Great. So not having standard tooling made this kind of a pain in the butt. And the biggest reason that I hate deploys is that I'm going to say that we're naive about the deployment complexity. And here's what I mean by that. When I write code, I'm thinking about a bajillion things. And off the top of my head, I'm going to try to make a list of all the things I'm kind of worried about when I'm writing code. First, I want to minimize the queries that I'm making from the database. Then I want to make sure that there's not some quiet little method with ridiculous runtime complexity. Active record makes it easy to do ridiculous things. I'll give it all back and I'll do something ridiculous with it. Maybe I'm the only one who does that. It's okay. I try to write validation so that I won't cause data integrity problems later on. I want to make sure that if we're making an API call or other network calls, that we can handle a network failure. I want to try to put things in background tasks so that I can keep the user experience really fast. And I want to make sure that we're doing some error handling. Usually I want to throw an error, or maybe if it's at a very core, important place in the app, I don't want to throw an error. I want to report, but absolutely keep moving. I want to make sure that there's good statistics coming in about user actions and about computation problems so that we can really decide if this was a good change to make. And I want to add layers of caching as appropriate for that feature. Everything from like individual little responses that we get from the APIs to how headers for the entire page. I want to do all of it. I want to not walk away from my code without making sure it's readable. I will probably be the person that inherits my terrible code, and I want to leave myself some breadcrumbs to make sure I can figure out what I did. And this is the kind of thing that we're all doing every time we build a little button, right? We bring this knowledge of all the complexity of code with us when we walk into any new feature. Here's how I deploy. Cat deploy, or maybe you're using Fabricator, maybe you're using Qbot, but you run your scripts. Then you look at the website, then you look at New Relic, then you look at Bugsnag, and then you get a sandwich. Like, there is no complexity here at all. And like, honestly, we're probably not looking at New Relic and Bugsnag most of the time. We're mostly focused on that sandwich. So the thing that's kind of revealed by this checklist is that we're treating deploys like they're not that complex. We're worrying about far fewer things than we probably should. So if I were taking this seriously, I would think about, there would be a lot more things in my checklist, and I think if I had that, my deploys would be less dangerous, and I maybe would stop hating them. So all that is to say, that's what I mean by being naive about deployment complexity. The complexity is there, we're just not thinking about it all the time. And I think I was relatively lucky in how I deployed. So I'm going to start by telling you some nice things about places I deployed, and then I'm going to pull out some of the problems. So at GitHub, they had the energy and the time and the concern to invest a lot in their deployment tooling. Enrique, where's Enrique? Hello. You mentioned yesterday that we were deploying with Qbot, and that made a lot of things easier. So Qbot deploys our CoffeeScript wrapped around Capistrano, but they have an interaction with them. So Qbot's talking to you as he's running the Capistrano key. Sorry, I don't know, whatever a bot is talking to you as it's deploying the Capistrano scripts. And overall, it's a two-step deploy. So first, it's a canary deploy. It'll take your new code and put it on one server. And then, after 4 minutes, if you don't see any performance spikes, and that's being production traffic, so you'll know if you have problems. If you see any performance spikes or error spikes, this is a time where you can either try to diagnose the problem, what's out in production but not affecting too many users, or you can pull it back, you know. And then after 4 minutes, Qbot will tell you that it's safe to deploy, so you can deploy to all of the servers. This is really helpful. This means that I'm not, like, we baked in good process, and I don't have to remember to do all those steps every time. Early on, they also created a lot of pre-production environments that simulated various aspects of production. So it's sometimes a block, like you usually have a staging environment, but staging doesn't exactly represent production in a few different ways. So maybe you don't want to consume the main API. Or maybe if you have a specific part of your app that will affect user data, you want to pull that out of staging because you don't want it to affect users. So at GitHub, they created lots of little pre-production environments that all represent fairly accurately to production this one little thing, but it's blocked in some other way, so you won't affect users. So if you want to try out a background task, there's an environment for that. And if you want to test your changes to Git RPC, for example, that's a different and much more complex and frankly kind of scary to me environment. But the best part about shipping at GitHub was that there were culturally enforced best practices. And because there was a long line so developers were responsible for shipping their own code. If I wrote this feature, I will deploy this code, as opposed to, I wrote this feature, I will give it to someone else to deploy. So everyone's standing in line, waiting to deploy their code. And because there's a long line, there's this incentive that everyone has to make sure that your deploys run smoothly and quickly. If I'm at the front of the line and I mess up my deploy, then I've maybe ruined the day for everyone that's standing behind me. So everyone who's working with me as I get my PRs ready wants to make sure this ships well. So those are all the great things about working at GitHub. Before I worked there, I worked at a company called MagmaLabs. I think some of the people in the room have experience with that. And it was a place that just invest as much in their deploy tooling, so they used a lot of off-the-shelf products. And I think it was a more normal experience. The first thing to know about deploys at ModCloth were that there were 50 engineers working all week long, mostly on one Rails app, and then each week, all the features that we had finished would be released at once in one giant, what I'm calling mono deploy. It's like a monolith, but a deploy. I have a problem with puns, I'm sorry. So in a mono deploy, you start the deploy by giving yourself amazing Git headaches. If you merge everyone's code into one release candidate all at once, just imagine the conflicts you'll get. It's all true, you them all. And then we would split our cluster of servers into two, and we would move traffic away from one of the clusters, and we would deploy new code to that cluster. And then we would click around the website to give ourselves a false sense of security about the goodness of our code. The problem here is that we weren't getting production traffic. This was like we were the only traffic. So then we would redirect the production traffic to the new code, and only then would we see our production problems or our errors. So it was like it didn't happen every time, but it wasn't unheard of that when we moved traffic to our new cluster, we would see all of the errors. And at that point, you can't really just throw on a few more commits because you're affecting half of your users. If we were doing this with a true canary deploy, we would have deployed our new code to one server, and then if we had a bug to fix, it would have been a little bit more, I wouldn't have felt as bad about leaving a few users in pain while we figured out the problem. But when it's half of your users, you have to pull it back immediately. And as I'm recommending canary deploys, I don't want to be blasé about it. I don't want to be casual. It's hard to do this because you're potentially giving some of your users a bad experience in exchange for getting more information as a development team. And that's a balance that you have to work out. But back to mono deploys. So the bigger problem was that so many things can go wrong in a mono deploy. If there was a problem, it wasn't immediately obvious where the problem was coming from. Was this from my feature? Was this from your feature? Was this a combination of our features interacting? And also, if I finished this code a week ago, then I have moved on to something else. I'm no longer thinking about that thing. And if I have a bug and I have to go back and think about it, I don't remember. I'm doing bigger and better things now. So if you want to think of your PRs of your branches as little airplanes that need to land, think about how much nicer it is to let them all land one after the other than trying to simultaneously land 50 planes at once without anything crashing. Crashes happen. The other thing I want to call out about deploys at ModCloth was that they were running from Capistrano scripts on the command line, which probably sounds like not a bad idea. But here's some of the things that we ran into. We would deploy on Wednesdays, and on Wednesdays we would get really interesting bug reports from users. Some of them would be bad enough that they would escalate them to us immediately. And even if we could reproduce those problems on production, as the developer, I have no idea what code is running, so I don't know what to pull down to reproduce that locally. This is a problem. Somebody in the office did know what code was running, the person who was running the deploy. But the person who is running the deploy is very busy, and they don't have time to sit there and talk to everyone in the office about all the bugs that are coming up. This is a problem. So, if there were actions that we needed to take, like email the users about a new feature, we didn't have visibility into when our features were out. We didn't know what the state of things was. And I think this problem is mostly becoming a thing of the past because of chat-offs. Running commands from your team's chat room is pretty popular. It's increasingly popular. And you can use bots to deploy, but even if you don't use bots to deploy, the bots can report deploy statuses to the chat room. So if I got one of these error reports today, I think I would be able to check and see what's running in production right now. So I'm going to pull out some of the specific things that we were doing to more, is that we didn't deploy the branch that we developed. Instead, we would build our feature in one PR, and when we were ready to ship it, we would break that up into multiple PRs. There was one strictly enforced rule, and that was if you have migrations, you pull your migrations into a separate pull request. The reason behind this, that you can probably guess, is that as our database was growing, we had more database concerns than most engineers had seen before. The other problem is, as our engineering team was growing, we had a lot more migrations. And it's inefficient to have every person run migrations as opposed to, I will collect all of your migrations, I will vet them, I will make sure you're not about to bring down the database, and then I will run the migrations. And so this is a pattern of pulling the most risky parts of a feature out into a separate pull request, shipping that first, shipping that and making sure it's safe, and then moving on. And I think this is a great pattern, and I've started to do this in a lot more ways. So when I needed to make an API change, that was much more risky than everything else in the rest of my pull request. So I pulled that out, and I got someone on the API team to look just at this one change. They could talk to me about it, and then I could release that. I could make sure that that change worked, and I could focus on making sure that the response was what it needed to be without any errors. And after that was good, I could ship the rest of my feature. So the worst parts of GitHub deploy, I don't work there anymore. I can talk about this part. So one of the frustrations I had at GitHub was that our tools were not general purpose. One time I created a new application, and in order to get that low friction deploy that we had for the main app, I had to make 4 different PRs to different services to get that going for the new application. So it's a pretty high startup cost. The second thing is that you have to onboard people to chat ops, which is pretty hard. So it's embarrassing to make a mistake in front of your entire team, and that's what you're doing when you're learning chat ops. You try something, and it doesn't work, and everyone in the company can see that you didn't really know how to deploy. I wish that I had eventually stopped making typos, but I just kept making typos my entire time. The other thing is that it's not easy to browse through chat ops. You can't just open up, you can't search through and say, what are the available options to me? It's hidden. So those are some things that we could have made better. Eventually, as I was trying to learn chat ops, I gave up trying to search through the help page, and I just read the Qbot source code, so that's how bad it was. So, what are some things that would make deploy safe and straightforward for everyone? This is the thing that was bothering me. Every time I need to make an app, or every time I need to onboard someone to chat ops. And I found myself wishing for something that was easier to deploy, but more customizable. I still want control over how it works. One example, when I've told some people about what I wanted, they've said, oh my god, just use Heroku. But I don't think that's the right answer. If you're working on an internal thing, if you're working on something that you don't want to be on the open internet, Heroku doesn't really make that an option. And there's some cost to using Heroku that I won't go into because there are Heroku people here, I think. So it was those kinds of concerns that led me to, along with a friend, start Absolutely, with the goal of one-click deployments. Then that was built on top of Docker and AWS. And I learned lots of weird, fun things about deployments that are not really relevant to this talk. My favorite one, I'm just going to tell you one, because it's so useful and so straightforward. Okay, have you heard people talk about self-healing infrastructure? It's like a buzzword. You can make self-healing infrastructure, and the idea is that when a service goes down, it will automatically bring itself up. Sounds magic, right? You can do this in AWS by creating an auto-scaling group with a minimum instance count set to 1, and as soon as it fails a health check, it will recreate itself. That's all it is. There's a whole buzzword around this one setting. Okay. I was just amazed by that. Okay. I'm just gonna on the top. So the best thing that I learned from starting Absolutely was not weird hacks about self-healing infrastructure. It was things I learned from talking to our customers about their pain points. So I'm going to go through things I learned from my customers. The first is that I was used to watching these tech talks that were coming out of Netflix and Google, and they very much had a right way and a wrong way to deploy. So I had just been indoctrinated. But talking to my customers, I learned that they do not care about that at all, not one bit. They have immediate concerns. They need to get their code out right now, and they don't care about blue-green deploys or any other color deploys. They want to know how to get their code out fast. So they are using every tool under the sun, every methodology under the sun, and they're using anything that they can get going fast. So here are some tools that our customers were either using or considering. They're roughly in chronological order and in order of complexity. So if you have just a simple web page, you can absolutely deploy by SSHing onto your server and running git pull. As you grow, you have to do something harder. So each one of these things is interesting in their own right, but I'm not going to talk about any of them. I'm going to talk about trends across them, and I'm going to throw two more in here. Asgard is the deploy control plane that came out of Netflix, and when they rewrote it, they called it Spinnaker. And Spinnaker is the thing that Cloud Foundry wanted to be. It's like the deploy as a service for enterprise. And Spinnaker is an open source project, but it's hard to use because it was one part of a Netflix ecosystem, right? There were many apps that were talking to each other. They pulled this one out, and they're like, here, use this. So, of course, it takes a lot of work to integrate with that. So there's hosted Spinnaker tools now. That makes it a little bit easier. Similarly, Kubernetes is robust, but also very difficult to use. So look for tools coming out on top of Kubernetes that make it easier to use. So one of the trends in this list is that the tools are growing in complexity, but starting with Heroku and the CI companies, they're trying to make it usable by large teams, which seems to require a web interface. You can probably take actions on the command line, but you should be able to see them and audit them and change settings in a UI. The other thing to appreciate is that there are deep differences between all of these tools. Sometimes the community converges on a workflow or a solution, and this is an example of the community doing the exact opposite. The market is continuing to fracture and experiment and try new things, especially when it comes to the enterprise level things. So the end result of this fracturing is that most people in their day-to-day lives don't benefit from any of the best practices because they're using every single different tool. So it's really truthful to say there are no best practices. The next thing I learned from customers is that when I would sit down with their operations team, they loved their command line tools, as you'd expect. They didn't think they had a deployment problem. They were using Chef or Puppet or Capistrano or Fabric. And when I asked if they had any pain points, they said, no, I'm really good at it. I just need more people to help me. This is kind of a hilarious response. They're using a tool where people can't help them, where their tool silos them away. And then the complaint is that they need more people. It's because of their tool. So CLIs they limit visibility inherently. And everyone who's involved in building software really has a stake in knowing either how to deploy or the status of a deploy. And that's, again, where I think chat-ops and a web interface can help people solve this problem. So with Hubot, we ran scripts in Hubot, which meant that everything that we were doing on the command line, we could start to pull out into an interface that everyone could see. And this also functions as an audit. If you're worried about new engineers deploying, remember that you can see exactly what they're doing and you can help them along the way. So I think some people, especially people that come from an operations background, are skeptical that everyone needs to deploy. And I want to try to convince you of this fact. Anecdotally, well, I'm out of time, so I'll just jump into that. So everyone from the new interns on your development team to, I will call them the senior director or vice president of fancy pants, like those people in your company, Those people should be able to deploy too. Everyone should be able to deploy. It's hard to make that the case, and it's a little bit scary. It's scary because sometimes you don't want your CTO deploying. Okay, I'm going to done in case our CTO is not. To do that, you have to make your process documented and auditable. And ideally, it would be visible so that people can see people deploying before they themselves have to deploy. So everyone needs to be able to deploy. It's not just the dev team. There are good project managers who absolutely want to know what the status of the deploy is, because a holdup there will change their entire schedule. And really great things can happen if you start shipping with feature flags or dark ships. So if you ship with dark ships, then you're running through the new code path, and you're just not showing anything visible to the users. And it can be in the hands of the product person when they want to ramp that up. So suddenly your product people are not deploying, but they're shipping things. And then one of the most interesting use cases that we had at Absolutely was a logistics and shipping company. And they had invented a DSL, a domain-specific language, to define all of their customer settings because they were very complex. And their customer support team would be trained in how to use this DSL as part of their onboarding. And then when they talked to a customer, they would update the DSL for that, or they would update the settings for that customer. And because they didn't want all of their support team to have to become Capistrano experts, so they opted to use a web interface-based deploy, so that as soon as they updated the changes to the customer, they could just deploy it out to all of their servers. Awesome. So, the last thing I learned from our customers is that the DevOps dream, remember the DevOps dream, it was the idea that we would think about the operability of our code during development. And what I learned from our customers is that DevOps kind of died. We need to bring it back. I'm not a DevOps engineer, I'm really an engineer, but I think there's this wonderful thing about DevOps, which is we need to get used to not throwing it over the wall and understanding our problems, because honestly, half the time you try to throw it over the wall, it just like comes back and hits you in the head. So just stop it. So I think the right way to do that is to expand our the way that we think about deploys from being cat deploy to all the things that we need to think about. So pulling it apart into different levels. If you have a multi-rollout of a feature, those should totally be in separate PRs. They should ship separately. Okay, here are my takeaways. Never run a mono deploy. Deploying individual features is great if you can do that. Make sure your migrations and scripted changes are backwards compatible so that you can ship them and then move forward at your own pace. And then lastly, deploying via chat apps and web interfaces is a great way to make your changes visible to the entire team and auditable. It means that less experienced engineers can deploy because there's an entire team waiting to help them if they need it. So thank you. I'm Rachel, aka the Maravilla Explosiva, and you should totally come talk to me about some feminist stickers.
Okay, thank you so much, Rachel. This was very impressive. I don't know if you have any questions from the audience. Something people want to ask? No? Okay, then I guess everything was very clear then. Okay, so thank you so much, Rachel.
There's one question.
Oh, there's a question. We're there.
Hi. I wanted to know if you have any other alternative to a bot for deploying other than Cuba.
Wait, say it again?
A bot for deploying other than Cuba.
Bots. I don't know the bots. I think some people do Docker.
Oh, thank you. So some people are running their own build servers to do Docker deploys, and I think they set those up to run through their command line. I don't know of open. Does anyone else know of open sourced deploy bots? Crowdsourcing this question. No. Okay. I don't know.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, over
I
there.
have another question. Rachel, for your work at GitHub, it's quite an orientation and you're pretty much into process. I mean, your deploy process is quite mature at GitHub. And some of our companies are not that focused on processes. So our processes are not that mature at GitHub, and you were in trouble anyway. So the question is, what can we expect about those kind of issues about deployment?
Is the question, what could we do at our organizations even though they haven't had the chance to, even though investing in new processes.
That's right. Should we put some budget on that kind of process? Because if you have problems with your budget, what can we expect with a small budget?
So I wanted to try, in kind of the talk, I wanted to try to pull out things that as engineers we could do, like things that we could advocate for. And I think that one of the first ones is shipping things in smaller bits and changing the deploys. And I know that tool changes, getting away from whatever tools you're using is like a larger conversation, but shipping in smaller bits is something that you could do almost at a personal level, depending on how much people are looking at what you do. If no one's looking, you could just do it.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know. I'll think about it. We should talk later.
I think last question.
Hi. Two things. One is kind of anecdote. I am an ops person, and I actually think that CLI tools are great. I think that CLI tools are great. That's confession right there. I think one thing people like me can do is be more open about what's happening. You could maybe if you're a small company, you don't have chat ops, you don't have resources, but you build in a chat ops culture, right? But you can go ahead and say, my deployment process is going to be X person is going to do it. When he starts the deployment, he has to start, giving a narrative of what's going on at every single step. This is what I'm running, this is the output, this is what's going on, these are the logs, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of a manual chat ops thing. That's an anecdote. Now, the question, you're a consultant now, contractor, whatever. But you know, and you said so in your slides, deployments are terrible. And then again, later on, deployments should be everyone's business. In your experience, what's the resistance from people around the company to kind of lose the fear of deployments? Because no one wants to do deployment. Everyone wants Patsy to do it for them.
That's a great question. So I absolutely understand the fear. I felt the fear, and then as the organization grows, they're even more afraid because there's more money on the line, right? And every deploy is a chance for something to go wrong. I absolutely understand the fear. I think the problem with, I think one way to bootstrap ourselves out of the problem is to start by documenting the process and giving ourselves a deployment checklist that we look through during development. If you, so it was common, I think it's common, I don't know, you can tell me if it's common, that when you're ready to ship a feature, you might include a rollout plan in your PR, for example. And the rollout plan might be run this migration, update the code, run the scripts, so clean the data, and then finish a deploy. It might be multiple steps. And I think that all of those things going out at one time is one of the scary things, right? You can't slow down. Once you start, you're just in this, you're caught on a train and it's moving and you go. And so I think if we gave ourselves a little, if we made it possible for people to ship a thing and then consider the next step and ship a thing and consider the next step, I think it would make it possible for people to collaborate more. Because, okay, people are very smart. Everyone is very smart who is writing code. And this is a thing that we haven't made accessible to them. We haven't given them the tools to diagnose problems, to see problems, to understand it, and to jump into it. It's just going to remain scary and unknown, I think, until we expand. So I think breaking things down into smaller bits and then communicating the complexity of these things more. Is that a generic answer? Is that a useful answer? I don't know. Yeah. All right. We can dive in more.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's give her another round of applause, please.
I love my cats.
Thank you so much. And we're going to move forward